The Ade family was a picture of contrast. Mr. and Mrs. Ade, a hard-working middle-class couple, raised their 4 children with strict discipline and high expectations. Their first daughter, Jane, was the golden child, the obedient one. She did her chores without complaints, excelled in school, and followed her parents' rules. Genevieve, on the other hand, she was the black sheep of the family, forgetful with chores, struggling with schoolwork, always one mistake away from her father's belt, and Jane loved it. The more her father praised her and punished Genevieve, the more Jane fed on the validation. She liked seeing Genevieve fail, she liked being better, and Genevieve knew it. The midday sun hung heavy in the sky, casting sharp shadows over the school compound. Laughter and chatter filled the air as students poured into the school cafeteria. Inside, Genevieve sat at the back, unwrapping her lunch. A plate of steaming jollof rice with fried plantains. She picked up her fork and was about to take a bite when the door swung open. Jane stood at the entrance, arms crossed, her face a mask of entitlement. "Genevieve, give me half of your lunch money," Jane ordered, stepping forward. Genevieve looked up slowly. Irritation flared on her chest. She thinks she can boss me around just because she is the favorite, she thought. "As you can see, I have already used it," she replied, stuffing a forkful of rice into her mouth. "Okay, you can share your lunch with me," Jane ordered. "I won't be doing that," Genevieve replied. Jane's lips curled into a smirk, but her eyes darkened. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with quiet menace. "You don't want to do this with me, Genevieve. Give me half of your lunch, or you will regret it." Genevieve met her gaze, chewing slowly before swallowing. "I said no. Now leave me alone." Jane's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, she straightened. "Okay," she said, turning on her heel and walking away. But Genevieve knew that look. Jane was planning something, and it wouldn't be good. That evening, the aroma of vegetable soup filled the Ade household. In the kitchen, Genevieve stirred the bubbling pot while her mother, Mrs. Ade, chopped bitter leaves on the wooden cutting board. "Pass me the palm oil," her mother instructed. Genevieve obeyed, watching as the rich red oil sizzled in the pot. She enjoyed these moments, even if her mother often criticized her. It was one of the few times she felt close to her mother. Dinner was almost ready when Mrs. Ade finally stepped away. "Go take your bath," she told Genevieve. "When I come back, I will serve the food." Genevieve wiped her hands and exited the kitchen, leaving the pot of soup simmering on the stove. That was the moment Jane had been waiting for. She slipped inside, her footstep light as a cat's. Glancing over her shoulders, she listened for any movement. Satisfied that she was alone, she grabbed a packet of salt and poured every last grain into the soup. A slow, wicked smile spread across her lips. "Let's see how perfect you are now," she whispered before vanishing into the shadows. Dinner was served as the Ade family gathered around the table. Mr. Ade took the first bite. His jaw worked for a moment before his face twisted in disgust. He spat the food onto the floor. "What nonsense is this?" he bellowed. The twins, Jacob and Sam, had already started spitting into their napkins, their faces contorted in horror. Mrs. Ade's eyes started in confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked. "This food is an insult," Mr. Ade thundered, slamming his fist against the table. "Taste it and see." Mrs. Ade frowned. She had tasted the soup before leaving the kitchen. It had been perfect. "I don't need to taste it again," she said firmly. "Eat the food, woman," Mr. Ade roared. Mrs. Ade hesitated before taking a spoonful. The moment it touched her lips, she gagged and spat it out. "What happened to my soup?" she cried in horror. A slow, deliberate voice cut through the tension. "Mother," Jane said sweetly, "I saw Genevieve pour the entire container of salt into the soup." A stunned silence fell over the room. Genevieve's eyes widened. "That's a lie," she cried. "I didn't do anything." But Jane wasn't finished. She even said, Jane continued, lowering her voice, that she would deal with you and Papa because you always find fault in what she does. She wanted to show you Pepe. Genevieve felt her breath caught in her throat. "What?" Mr. Ade exploded. "Genevieve, is this true?" "Father, no, I swear, I didn't." But Mr. Ade had already unbuckled his belt. The first lash tore through the air, landing hard against Genevieve's arm. She screamed, stumbling back. "You disgraceful child," he bellowed, striking her again and again. "How dare you insult your mother and I this way?" Tears streamed down Genevieve's face as the belt cut across her skin. From the corner of the room, Jane watched satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. After what felt like eternity, Mr. Ade finally threw the belt aside, his chest heaving. "You will eat that soup," he said coldly, "or you will go to bed hungry." Genevieve trembled where she knelt on the floor, her body sore and bruised. She cast a desperate glance at her mother, but Mrs. Ade simply turned away. Jacob and Sam sat in silence, too afraid to speak. Jane, meanwhile, was happily buttering a slice of bread. Genevieve swallowed hard. She couldn't eat the soup. It was poison. But neither could she bear the hunger. Slowly, she reached for the plate of food, with fingers shaking. She dipped into the bowl, lifted it to her lips, and stopped. Jane was watching her, a smirk playing on her lips. Genevieve clenched her jaw. No, she wouldn't give Jane the satisfaction. With a deep breath, she pushed the bowl away and stood. "I'd rather starve," she whispered before turning and leaping into her room. As she closed the door behind her, she made herself a silent promise. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Hurt turned into resentment, resentment turned into hatred, and soon the sisterhood was shattered. Genevieve lay coiled on her tin mattress, hunger gnawing at her inside like a wild animal. The bruises on her arm and legs throbbed with every heartbeat, but the real pain sat heavy in her chest. She could still hear the faint sound of laughter from the dining room, Jane's laughter. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "This isn't fair," she whispered into the darkness. Her stomach twisted painfully, but she refused to cry again. She had cried enough. She had begged enough. And what had it given her? More suffering, more humiliation. No, she wouldn't let Jane win. Slowly she sat up, her fists clenching. By the time Genevieve reached senior secondary school, she found something that made her happy, or rather someone. A transfer student, Ferdinand. He was charming, good-looking, and popular. And when he asked Genevieve to be his girlfriend, she felt special. Finally, something that was hers. But love, as she soon learned, was not as beautiful as the romance novel described. A few weeks into the relationship, Ferdinand changed. The sweet words became demands. The loving gestures became pressures. "Genevieve," he would say, his voice teasing but firm, "if you love me, you will prove it." At first, she laughed it off, but then the teasing turned into daily request. And when she refused, Ferdinand's eyes darkened. "Do you think I'll wait forever?" he said one afternoon, his arms crossed. "There are plenty of girls who would be happy to take your place. If you continue this way, I will have no other choice but to break up with you and be with Cordelia." Genevieve's stomach clenched. Cordelia, one of the most popular girls in school, had been eyeing Ferdinand since the beginning. If she lost him, she would be a laughingstock. She couldn't let that happen. So against every screaming instinct in her head, she agreed. Just once, and she would never do it again. It was a risky plan. Genevieve brought Ferdinand home, sneaking him into the shared bedroom she had with Jane. She knew Jane would be out for a while. They had time. It would be quick, or so she thought. They kissed as Ferdinand's hands roamed her body, and his shirt dropped to the floor. The door suddenly burst open. Jane stood there, eyes wide with shock. Then her expression shifted. She smirked. Genevieve's heart dropped. Panic rushed through her as she hurriedly grabbed her clothes. "Jane, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Please, don't tell Papa." Jane didn't move. Her hands reached for the door, and then she locked it from outside. Genevieve froze. Her body turned cold with fear. "Jane, please," she cried, banging on the door. No response. "Jane, at least let Ferdinand leave before Papa gets home." From the other side, Jane's mocking voice floated through the door. "You should have thought about that before you brought him here." Genevieve's legs gave out. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Her sister had trapped her, and there was nothing she could do. She thought of letting him out through the window, but the window had iron bars. She could hear Jane's voice from outside the door as she spoke to their father on the phone, and then she knew she was done for. 20 minutes later, their father arrived. Genevieve barely had time to react before the door was thrown open. Mr. Ade took one look at the boy in his daughter's room, and all hell broke loose. Ferdinand barely got the chance to run. Mr. Ade dragged him out, fists flying. The entire neighborhood gathered, watching in amusement. Some whispered, some laughed, but Genevieve, she stood in the room, frozen in shame. Then the belt came. Mr. Ade whipped her without mercy. Her skin burned. Tears poured down her face. She cried. She screamed. She expected her mother to help her, but she never did. And when it was over, she laid on the floor, bruised, broken, and humiliated. That night, as she lay nursing her wounds, Jane walked into the room. Genevieve's body tensed, and then Jane laughed. "Next time, think twice before you do something stupid," she said, her voice filled with glee. Then she walked away, satisfied, and Genevieve, her hatred for Jane burned hotter than before. That day, she vowed she would never forgive her sister. Never. Back at school, Ferdinand, her ray of sunshine, broke up with her and started dating Cordelia, who mockingly rubbed it off on Genevieve's face. Genevieve cried day and night. She hated her life. One evening, as she sat in the corner crying, one of her brothers approached her and hugged her tight, which was unusual. "I'm sorry you have to go through this. I have noticed that you are always the victim. Father and mother would never believe anything anyone says other than the words from Jane. Do not worry, my sister. It will only get better." Genevieve hugged him tightly and cried, and that encounter brought them closer together. As the years passed, the rift grew. The two sisters barely spoke. If they were in the same room, they acted as though the other didn't exist. Genevieve held onto her hatred, and Jane, she thrived in it. When Jane left for university, Genevieve felt a weight lift off her chest. For years, she had been trapped in her sister's shadow, always being compared, always feeling lesser. Now, with Jane gone, she could finally breathe. She told herself she would never think of Jane again, but fate had other plans. At university, Jane met Anna. Anna was everything Jane wasn't. Where Jane had once fed off her sister's failures, Anna was kind, selfless, and warm. She came from a wealthy background, yet she never showed an ounce of pride. She treated Jane like a sister. And soon, Jane introduced her to Genevieve. The first time Genevieve met Anna, something shifted inside her. She had spent her whole life resenting Jane, but Anna was different. She was like the sister Genevieve had always wished for. Anna included her, loved her, and supported her. She gave Genevieve her old designer's clothes, sent her money for upkeep, and always checked in. Genevieve adored her. She would do anything to protect her. By the time graduation arrived, Anna's long-time boyfriend Kennedy proposed. Her parents planned a grand engagement and graduation party. Even better, Anna's uncle had secured a prestigious job for her in the US. Since she was about to marry Kennedy, she asked her uncle to find job opportunities for him and Jane as well. When her uncle confirmed that he had secured 3 job offers in the US, Anna was overjoyed. Jane felt like the luckiest woman alive. A prestigious job, a life abroad. Everything felt perfect. But Genevieve knew Jane too well. And deep down, she had always known Jane didn't deserve happiness. That night of Anna's engagement party was magical. The hall sparkled with golden lights. Guests laughed, danced, and toasted to Anna and Kennedy's bright future. Genevieve was in the middle of a conversation when she received a call from a friend. The music was too loud, so she excused herself to find a quieter place. She took the lift to the 4th level at the back of the building. And that's when she saw it. A car, rocking slightly. The windows were fogged. Genevieve rolled her eyes. Some people have no shame, she thought. She continued her phone call until she saw someone stepped out of the car. Her heart stopped. It was Jane. Genevieve's stomach twisted painfully. Jane hadn't come to the party with a boyfriend. So who was in the car with her? She questioned herself. A few moments later, another figure stepped out, buckling his belt, fisting his shirt. Genevieve's blood ran cold. It was Kennedy, Anna's fiancé. Genevieve felt like she had been punched in her chest. She gripped the balcony railing, her hands trembling. Jane and Kennedy had been sneaking around behind Anna's back. The same Anna who treated Jane like a sister. The same Anna who had secured Jane's dream job. Genevieve felt rage boil inside her. But she didn't act. Instead, she observed them for the rest of the night. They were perfect actors. They smiled. They laughed. They danced like nothing had happened. Genevieve clenched her fist. She could not let this go. A few days later, Genevieve called Anna. She needed to meet her alone. At a quiet cafe, Genevieve looked Anna in the eyes and said, "I saw Jane and Kennedy together that night in a car." Anna's face drained of color. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. "No, Jane would never do this to me." Genevieve took her hand, her voice firm. "They will deny it if you ask, so don't. Catch them in the act." Hannah hesitated, her chest rising and falling with easy, shaky breaths. In the end, she listened. Anna started watching them closely. She noticed the small signs, the way Jane and Kennedy exchanged glances, the way Kennedy stepped away when Jane entered the room, the way Jane always checked her phone when Kennedy was around. And then one evening, Anna walked into Jane's bedroom and found them together. Naked. Kennedy's hands were on Jane's waist. Jane's lips were on his. Anna froze. A cold wave of shock, heartbreak, and betrayal crashed over her. Her best friend, her fiancé together. For a long time no one spoke. Then Jane pulled away, her face pale. "Anna, I don't." Anna's voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was cold, numb, empty. Kennedy reached for her. "It's not what it looks like." Anna stepped back. She didn't need to hear any more lies. She had seen enough. She turned on her heels, walked out of the room, and never looked back. Anna ended the engagement. She cancelled the US job offers for both Jane and Kennedy. Kennedy tried to reason with her. Jane tried to apologize, but Anna was gone. Jane had lost everything. Genevieve then texted her, "How does it feel to get a taste of your own medicine?" "So, you are the snitch. How could you do this to me? Your own sister," Jane replied. Genevieve laughed bitterly. "Now you know what betrayal feels like." Jane broke down in tears. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Jane tried looking for jobs, but none were as good as the one Anna had secured for her. She reached out to Anna, but she was blocked everywhere. She tried to fix things with her parents, but the disappointment in their eyes were unbearable. Jane had lost everything, and Genevieve, she had her revenge, her perfect revenge. Jane tried to call Kennedy, but when he responded, his voice was hostile. "You witch! You seduced me and made me lose everything I have ever worked for. You are bad luck to me, Jane," he fired. "Please, Kennedy, I am alone and I need you now more than ever. You promised me that I was the one you loved." Jane cried. "Nonsense. It was fun while it lasted, but I never felt love for you," Kennedy said. "Please, Kennedy, don't leave me. I love..." Kennedy ended the call before she could finish. At that point, she understood what it was like for Genevieve all those years, and regret washed over her. What do you think about this story? Do you think Jane deserved what Genevieve did to her? I would like to hear from you all in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Please don't forget to like, comment, and share. See you in our next one. Bye.